I was so dedicated to my study, I never made time for a family. Tomoe was to be my heir. Her crimes, I could not forgive her.
No samurai would.
I devoted my life to the bow. The life it gave me was remarkable. But the life it took from me, family is more important.
Blinded by anger, burning with revenge, regrets, and forgiveness with the hope of saving one's legacy, that would summarize the tumultuous relationship of Sensei Ishikawa and his would-be adopted daughter turned traitor, Tomoe. The series of tales following Ishikawa and his last student is one surrounding mistrust, deception, and inability to properly trust again, and sadness. Today we're going to be going over the legacy of Sensei Ishikawa and how a life of resignation and shame by sheer chance would place him in contact with a young peasant by the name of Tomoe, a young girl who displayed a high level of raw skill with the bow and a determination to learn from the once revered master. This raw skill and determination gave Ishikawa a chance at redemption, a second chance to recover from the damage done to his reputation by his previous student, a chance for Ishikawa to have the way of the bow and his own personal legacy carry on. Unfortunately for him, history would have a funny way of repeating itself.
The last student I trained before her was Hironori Nagao. Hironori learned from my example. He led a rebellion to seize the clan. As his teacher, I could never be trusted again.
Now before we talk of Tomoe, we should begin with Sensei Ishikawa, a talented archer. Ishikawa would go on to develop his own famous technique of archery he would describe as the way of the bow. Through his unique methods, Ishikawa's military exploits and skill with the bow became legendary, eventually catching the eye of the samurai clan Nagao, who would employ him to teach his way of the bow, beginning with his very first student, Hidenori Nagao. Hidenori was a very skilled samurai who would go on to master Ishikawa's way of the bow, shaping him to be a very skilled archer. As Ishikawa puts it, Hidenori would eventually learn from his master's example. Hidenori became prideful and callous. He would go on to feel he deserved to be the head of Clan Nagao. Hidenori would lead a rebellion against his clan, implementing the way of the bow to give himself an advantage over his allies turned adversaries. Hidenori's rebellion would be put down with Hidenori killed, but since Sensei Ishikawa was his mentor, he too was punished. Ishikawa's services of Clan Nagao were immediately ended. They spared him death through complete shame by at least allowing him to resign from his post. With his resignation and well-known mentorship of Hidenori, Ishikawa would never be trusted again. He had a part in the rebellion as most of them saw it, even though he never directly contributed. So, Ishikawa took what little honor he could salvage from the ordeal, settling down just outside his childhood home of Hiyoshi Springs. Ishikawa would go on to live a life of seclusion, keeping to himself, refusing to teach ever again out of shame and regret for his contribution of Hidenori's rebellion, even rejecting teaching Jin at one point. He believed the way of the bow should die with him, a death suitable for a legacy as stained as his. This is how he would live until one day a peasant girl turned up with her makeshift bow. She demanded the skilled archer teach her the way of the bow. Refusing to oblige Ishikawa's request for her to leave, she would instead sink arrow after arrow into Ishikawa's targets in defiance. This would intrigue the old master. He never seen talent quite like hers. He described her as a prodigy and would decide the way of the bow would have to live on. This was a sign to continue teaching his legacy. If it was to resume with anybody, it would resume with this young peasant who was named Tomoe. Tomoe, as Ishikawa put it, would become his greatest student. He quickly invested everything he knew into her. Military tactics, the importance of surveying the battlefield beforehand, how to control crossroads and keep an entire town under siege with just a few well-placed archers. She would learn to live by her sensei's motto, one arrow, one death. Devouring every lesson her master had to teach, Ishikawa would grow to get close to Tomoe, ensuring she knew everything he did, including why it was so important for him to break his vow of never teaching again. His past with Clan Nagao and his reason for living in seclusion near Hiyoshi Springs were all unveiled to his new student, a past and a secret that he heavily guarded. As time continued, Ishikawa would not only completely trust Tomoe, but would develop a father-like relationship with her. He was slowly teaching her the values of being a proper samurai, values he expected her to uphold when the greatest blessing she could possibly receive was being prepared to be official, the adoption of Tomoe as Sensei Ishikawa's daughter, a continuation of not just his legacy and his teachings, but of his family. It seemed only natural as Tomoe was the only person that he was investing all his time, energy, and knowledge into, so it seemed like the appropriate jump. Until the dagger of betrayal was unsheathed.
I demand an answer.
She attacked me. Not bandits. Tomoe.
Why?
She has no idea what it means to be samurai.
You drove her to the Mongols.
Do not judge me.
Do not lie to me.
Ishikawa was training Tomoe in both the ways of the bow and how to act as a proper samurai. With her already a so-called prodigy in archery, he would find much more difficulty in making progress in shaping her as a proper samurai. Tomoe had a number of bad habits and tendencies one would normally not find it so easy to ignore, such as hoarding food or keeping a hidden blade up her sleeve. However, his desire for a family became so intense, Ishikawa would willingly ignore these signs, among a few others. He continued with her training until one day, he discovered the ultimate betrayal. Tomoe was using what she learned from Ishikawa to help a band of assassins. Ishikawa, being a dutiful samurai, decided to treat Tomoe no differently than a common assassin. He retaliated and attacked his former student, who in turn would defend herself. As luck would have it, this family dispute would occur as the Mongols were invading Tsushima, preventing Sensei Ishikawa or his prodigy to lend some help to their fellow samurais on Komodo Beach. This would start the hunt of Tomoe. What's interesting is at the start of Ishikawa's hunt for Tomoe, he spoke very highly of her. Her skill was something he was always sure to compliment, but during the first few tales, he spoke as if she was a beloved student that had just happened to go missing, seemingly completely omitting that she had attacked him. It was almost as if he was the one that regretted his actions. Over time, that affection would transition into absolute obsession of hatred, though. Tomoe would become a turncoat, teaching the Mongol invaders who captured her Ishikawa's very secretive way of the bow, as well as his valuable military tactics such as isolating and besieging towns with as little archers as possible. This would help ensure she was valuable to her new rulers, promising some sense of freedom for her, but she was also sure to keep the entire thing quite personal. Tomoe would soon target Hiyoshi Springs, a town that holds little military significance, with the terrain even favoring the town's defenders. The importance to it was simply Ishikawa was born there. A successful seizure of the town would result in the humiliation of her former sensei. Ishikawa, knowing very well Tomoe's thought process, was willing to take a gamble, let the town fall to the Mongols, and in the hour of victory, Tomoe would lower her guard, allowing them to take her down. Now, this might be a telling sign that Ishikawa is more than willing to do whatever he deems necessary to achieve the ultimate goal. It's very clear that he sees Tomoe as a giant threat, and he's more than willing to sacrifice a number of civilians in order to successfully neutralize that threat. This is also the very beginning of him allowing this personal vendetta between the two of them intensify. Later, Ishikawa would become so hell-bent on tracking his former student down that he would allow himself to become surrounded by a number of Mongols who catch him off guard, something Jin would be quick to scold him for, saying that he's very astute and alert, but when it comes to her, he makes very dangerous mistakes.
They had you surrounded.
Tomoe taught them well.
That's not why they outmaneuvered you.
If you have an insight, share it.
You didn't notice them because you were too focused on finding Tomoe.
Even I make mistakes, Sakai.
No, you don't. Except with her.
She clouds his judgment. He would allow his former student to utilize his own secrets against him. Tomoe would mock Ishikawa's past with Hironori, a sign of bitterness at her sensei's perceived betrayal, at attempting to kill her for her aid with assassins. She would eventually tell Jin to watch his own back, as Ishikawa may intend to kill him as well. Ishikawa, on the other hand, was growing to see Tomoe as more and more of a monster, a repeat of his mistake with Hironori all those years ago, a mistake that he never fully recovered from to begin with. Now Tomoe was reminding him of that mistake, one that was 100 times worse with Tomoe. Peasants were being slaughtered, shot in the back. Hundreds of Mongol warriors were taught the way of the bow. Hybrid Japanese and Mongol Arrows would soon be crafted, severed heads would be used for target practice, strung up bodies of dead samurais would also be used for target practice, with them even starting to attack caravans, leaving behind notes claiming these were the deeds of the ghost and the demon sensei. She was doing everything in her power to cause as much death and destruction as possible, with Jin and Ishikawa appearing to be the ones responsible. As she continued down this path, Ishikawa would begin to show more resistance towards Jin. Now initially he was reluctant to even teach Jin the way of the bow, a resistance that came with the reminder to Jin that Ishikawa has already raised a killer and a monster with Hironori and Tomoe. He refuses to raise a third. As he was beginning to look at the way Jin moved on the battlefield, he would criticize his movement as less samurai and more in line with a thief. Jin would remark that he would do anything necessary to defeat the enemy, at which point Ishikawa is quick to remind him of his duties as a samurai. As the story progresses and the legend of the ghost increases around the island, Ishikawa's obsession with Tomoe would also begin to grow, with the two hitting a crossroad that I think is important to the evolution of not just their relationship dynamic, but their individual characteristics. I think the actual conversation is better than I could ever explain it, so I'll just play it, but do keep in mind that it does show how flexible even Ishikawa is, and how his mentality begins to become consumed with the thought of bringing down the monster that he is responsible for raising.
You expect us to be perfect. Your uncle, me, Masako Adachi. But only a child expects perfection of his elders.
Finish your thought, Sensei.
We all carry weapons. We all choose between life and death.
And you're too comfortable with that power.
And if I weren't, I would be dead. And so would you, Ghost.
Not everyone can be a samurai.
But we're all killers.
From a dutiful samurai to acknowledging none of them are perfect, Jin would be a fool to think otherwise. It's refreshing. It's the moment where I would say Ishikawa is the most honest with himself and with Jin. He's aware this threat he has created with Tomoe is consuming him, an obsession very likely driven with anger far beyond just the betrayal of teaching the enemy his way, of just mocking him. Those are immensely significant in their own right. Don't mistake me from downplaying that. But let's not forget, Ishikawa wanted a family. In a way, no different than what Shimada wanted with Jin. Tomoe technically costed his future. And this is a person that's been dwelling and suffering from his past for so long that he might have banked so much on his future that with it ripped away from him, that's all he can really look forward to. She was a proper heir. Just as Shimada, Ishikawa devoted his life to what he knew best. It granted him and Shimada success and honor, but came at the cost of what Ishikawa would go on to realize was most important to him. In the final tale, Tomoe arranges Ishikawa and Jin to meet with her, to help her take down the remaining Mongols she helped train who have betrayed her. The tale displays just how difficult it really is to pinpoint who was right and who was telling the full truth. On one hand, Ishikawa acted pretty heavily when it came to his sense of honor and duty as a samurai, simply because of Tomoe helping a band of assassins, which is never really specified how she helped them, just that she utilized the teachings of Ishikawa to help this band, and she was punished by Ishikawa by him trying to kill her. She would then go on to attack Ishikawa in self-defense, get captured by the Mongols, and then she would claim that she taught her way of the bow to guarantee her freedom. She did kill captives, claiming they were tortured and it was a quick, painless death. Even if that was the case, she did go on to kill caravans of civilians going around the city, and of course teaching countless of Mongols Ishikawa's way, on top of promising the Khan the head of the ghost and the head of Ishikawa. Tomoe is clearly a person driven more by revenge than anything else, as that was her driving factor to help the Mongols to begin with. Even if it was for her freedom, she did still intend to capture Hiyoshi Springs for her sensei's humiliation, not to mention sending a mocking message about Hironori's rebellion and burning the banner of Clan Nagao. Had the Mongols not betrayed her, she most likely would have continued her work alongside them, or perhaps would have seized a boat to venture to the mainland as she does. It's difficult to say. What we can say is, arguably the crimes that she committed still weren't really punished. She was allowed to go. Ishikawa had an opportunity to deal with her as she fled on a boat to mainland Japan. But a final farewell note and show of appreciation of everything he had done for her was enough for him to forgive her. She was his daughter.
I am grateful. for your teaching, and for the chance to fight by your side a final time. I have been your student. I would have become your daughter. But the way of the bow is behind me now.
Ishikawa would go on to warn Jin to not make the same mistakes he has. Family is everything, and his honor, his dedication to the way of the bow, costed him his final chance at that. Don't let the ghost consume him, as his sense of duty pushed his daughter into the arms of the enemy.